The title of my sermon today is A Word from the Sycamore. Our scripture today that Ezra just read for us is that wonderful story of Zacchaeus in the sycamore tree. And when he climbs up the tree just to get a glimpse of Jesus. And we've all heard this story at one time or another. Probably we grew up with it. And I've preached on it a number of times. But you know, usually what we do is focus on Jesus and or Zacchaeus in that story. But I've never stopped to really think about the role of the tree in the story. So I did some research, and I found a little-known footnote in our passage in Luke. It's not in every translation, but it is in the NRSV, not necessarily the New Revised Standard Version, but the New Revised Susan Version. And the footnote is entitled, A Word from the Sycamore. Just so you know, the writers of that footnote took just a little bit of liberty with the story, but then again, didn't they all? So, let me share this footnote that I found. Footnote 37 of Luke chapter 19. I always wanted to do something important with my life. I always wanted to make a difference. But come on, I'm just a sycamore tree. I'm not one of those great cedars of Lebanon that the psalmists talk about. I'm not an acacia tree whose wood they used to build the Ark of the Covenant. I'm not a cypress like Noah used for the ark. I'm just a sycamore. And to make matters worse, I germinated on the wrong side of the road, so to speak. I grew up beside a busy, dusty road in the bustling city called Jericho. It was a place where no one ever really noticed me. It was a place where people were always busy on their way to one place or another. On top of which, Jericho is high desert country, and it's not easy to take root, to find nourishment. In short, it wasn't the greatest place to grow up, if you get my drift. But we don't always know why we were planted where we were. For what purpose? For what moment? For what time and place we were given seed? But then again, trees don't worry so much about those questions. We just sink our roots where we're planted, reach our branches to the sky, and wait and watch. Because you never know who might walk by. One day in that bustling town on that dusty road, a preacher came. A crowd was following him. There was a buzz about him. Words like Messiah and the Chosen One were being thrown about. And his given name, apparently, was Jesus. As the crowd approached, I noticed a man trying desperately to see over the crowd, to catch a glimpse of this Jesus, but he was too small, too short to see. Finally, realizing he couldn't see over the crowd, the man turns and looks at me. Then he walks towards me, and the next thing you know, he's climbing up and nestling into some of my higher branches to see this preacher. Jesus walked down the road towards us, and as he approached, Jesus stopped right by me, like he sensed something. He reached out and touched my trunk like he was offering a blessing. And then with his hand still on my trunk, Jesus looked up into my branches and saw the man sitting there. I'm not sure what was going on, but there was some kind of exchange of energy in that moment, not to sound too ooh-wow, but through my trunk where Jesus' hand rested and the branches the man was sitting on, I could feel it. Something happened. Jesus stood there for a moment looking at the man, then smiled, laughed a little, and called his name. Zacchaeus. I mean, how did he know his name? They'd never even met, I don't think. But there in my presence, Jesus called the man's name, called him from my branches, and told him that he, Jesus, was coming home with him. The crowd mumbled, "Who is this guy in the tree? He's a sinner, he's a tax collector, and we hear he's a cheat." And then Jesus turned and said to the crowd, I have come to save the lost. And like all of you, Zacchaeus, this sinner, is a holy child of God. There ends the footnote. And the people said. You know, when you think about it, the sycamore tree really is the star of the show of this scripture, because but for that tree, Zacchaeus would never have seen Jesus. But for that tree, Zacchaeus would never have been blessed by Jesus. But for that tree, Zacchaeus would never have been able to welcome Jesus into his home and his heart. Which makes me wonder, maybe our highest and best calling is to model that tree. I mean, it's to be people that, like that tree, enable others to see Jesus. It's to be people who lift others up so they too can be blessed. It's to be people that invite others to accept Jesus into their homes and their hearts. I mean, it's a simple formula that all of us can follow. It's really 3 basic lessons based on our scripture and our word from the sycamore. Grow where you're planted, reach your branches to the sky, and lift up whoever comes by. I mean, the first lesson is we must grow where we're planted. The scripture tells us that that tree was growing, that it germinated on a busy, dusty road in the bustling town of Jericho, which is not the greatest place to grow up, nor the most nurturing of environments. I mean, I couldn't help but think about some of the trees we see out here in New York City. I mean, growing in places you would think could never support life. But somewhere in those sidewalk cracks and the breaks in the asphalt, they find nurture and sustenance. Like that tree in Jericho, I think many of us may feel like we weren't planted in the most nurturing of environments. Maybe that means our families, or maybe that means our workplace, or maybe that means the current society in which we find ourselves. Whatever it is, we all know a little bit about being planted in a place where we're not really noticed or seen, a place that doesn't provide much nourishment or growth. But as the sycamore said, we don't always know why we were planted where we were, for what purpose we were planted, for what moment, for what time and place we were given seed. I mean, maybe like that tree, we just quit worrying about questions like that so much. Maybe we just sink our roots and grow where we are planted, because you never know who's gonna walk by. Which brings us to our second lesson. Once you sink your roots, then you reach your branches to the sky. A few weeks ago, I had the privilege of doing a speaking event up in Lenox, Massachusetts. And on the grounds of the place where I was speaking was this very old sycamore tree, dating back apparently a couple of hundred years. And the trunk was so huge that it would take several people holding arms to even encircle it. And its branches, they were just magnificent. You know, some were low and accessible that you could actually climb up onto, and others just soared in all directions, some out straight, some towards the sky. And nestled in those branches were birds and insects and even other plants. It was this multiple ecosystems within this beautiful tree. I actually have some photos I want to share with you of this tree. Travis, can you show us? We have about, I think, 4 or 5. This is the tree from a distance, the big sycamore. This is some of the huge branches coming up out of it. More of the branches coming out to the side and going up. The towering nature of the big canopy at the top. One of its main huge trunks. think it was the branches that got me. Just to look out at how this great tree had come up out of the ground and expanded and reached out. You know, another thing people worry about that I don't think trees do, they don't worry, is the direction of our branches. We worry about things like, what are we going to do with our lives? You know, what direction are we going to go? Trees, they just grow where their branches are naturally drawn. I was reading about that this week, and there's a great quote by Courtney Hollander, who was a botanist in Michigan, and she said this: plants, trees, they're stuck. I mean, the best they can do is just grow toward something. That's all they've got. They can't run, they have to adapt to their environment, and they've developed brilliant ways to do it. I mean, when you think about it, trees naturally form and grow based on what they are and where they are. The direction of their branches are formed from everything from prevailing winds to the angle of the sun. What direction have your branches grown? And why? You know, I put a Facebook post up earlier this week. I just kind of wanted to crowdsource this idea in the sermon, and I asked people, I was like, how did you find your purpose in life? Where did you look? And I didn't know if anybody was going to answer, but it kind of went, it didn't go viral, but I had like 70-some people weigh in and just talk and answer and share their stories, which was quite astounding. Many talked about the power of leaning into what naturally draws your heart. My friend, Reverend Denise Lavetti, who's an Episcopal priest here in the city, said this: I know I'm living my purpose when I do things that make me want to say to myself, oh, hi, yeah, there you are, there you are. We all branch into so many different ways and areas. It's like Reverend Dr. Cheryl Dudley said last week in her sermon, we all bring different ways to access God's power. And friends, we all have the ability to create ecosystems of life within those branches that we hold out. Multiple places where people thrive and are loved and feel safe. Which brings me to the third lesson. Lift up whoever comes by. In our scripture, the sycamore tree lifted up a man who felt small. Lifted up a man who would otherwise have gone unnoticed or unseen. And it happened because that tree had reached its branches out into the world. Off and on for the past couple of years, I've been actually working on a long-term vision statement for Madison Avenue Baptist Church, and it's kind of an in-depth perspective on who we are, and where we're going. And I actually finished a draft of it on Friday night, and I eventually will be sharing it with all of you, and I'm excited for you to read it. And I have to tell you, this tree image is spot on to what I've been reading and thinking about and dreaming for, actually, for this church. Because our beliefs here at Madison Avenue Baptist Church, our commitment to the gospel are our roots, which were planted right here 175 years ago. In this bustling town of New York City, which is not the easiest place to grow. It's not the most nurturing of environments. But our church ancestors grew where they were planted, and they reached their branches towards the sky in all different directions. And with those branches, they lifted up all who came by, all who might have felt small, all who might have otherwise gone unnoticed or unseen. They lifted them up for a view, an encounter with the one known as Jesus. That is the call of this church. And that is our individual call as well. I want to leave you this morning with just one other historical example of this call. Last Friday, as many of you know, marked the 60th anniversary of the Klan bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. 4 little girls were killed in that bombing. In addition to that tragic loss of life, much of the church was destroyed, including some of the stained glass in the back. As the news of the bombing spread worldwide, an artist in a tiny village in Wales heard about the tragedy and offered to create a new window to replace the destroyed back wall of that church. It was a window intended to lift up those who, because of the color of their skin, had not only been made to feel small and unseen, but brutally attacked and murdered. And so the window was created, paid for by the people of this tiny village. And now, near where that bomb exploded is a huge stained glass installation of a black crucified Christ. The hands of Christ are extended like branches of a tree out into the world. The right hand of the Christ is flexed to represent the pushing away, the letting go of hatred and injustice. And the left hand is outstretched with the palm open, welcoming in mercy and love and forgiveness. Try that. This is the image of the stained glass from Birmingham. I'm reminded of the words of the theologian Howard Thurman, who said, "God has placed a crown above your head so that you will spend your life growing tall enough to wear it." God has placed a crown above your head so that you will spend your life growing tall enough to wear it. I mean, I can't help but think of that great sycamore tree in the book of Luke, one of God's great creations that grew tall and formed this huge crown of branches that literally changed the trajectory of Jesus' ministry. This week, I want us all to go outside and find a tree. It'd be great if you could find a big tree with some low branches that you could actually climb up into, but you know, any tree will do. Go find a tree, and in the presence of that tree, say a word of thanks. And remember the lessons we talked about today. Remember a word from the sycamore. Grow where you are planted. Reach your branches up and out to the sky. And lift people up. Because you know, you never, ever might imagine who will be walking by. And the people said, amen.